Hi, everybody. We are going to give a minute or two more to let some folks trickle in. So just bear with us. If someone could confirm or come off mute and just let me know if you can hear me and see the shared slide, that would be great.
We got a thumbs up, so I think we're probably good.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Now, everyone, for the folks that just joined, we're just giving it 1 or 2 more minutes to let a few more people hop in the meeting, come from whatever meeting they came from before. All right, we'll give it about 30 more seconds and then we'll kick off. Alrighty, 3:03, it's a good time to start. I'm going to start with a couple housekeeping items and then I'll go through an agenda and then we'll dive into it. So first off, this is being recorded. Yesterday's office hours was recorded as well, and we'll share whichever one seems like the better recording to share out. We'll also share the slides and a couple extra documents after this meeting as well. So you'll have everything that we share and talk about on this meeting in your inbox. And then we'll also post it to our website. The other thing that I'll say up front is there's a couple different sections to this presentation. I'll pop up the agenda. If you can hold the Q&A, live Q&A till the end, just so we have time to get through everything, that would be great. We got through it all in about 25 minutes yesterday, so there'll be plenty of time for questions. If you have questions in the meantime, feel free to write them in the chat. That way you don't forget them. And also, whichever one of us is not speaking at the time can try to answer it via chat, but we'll save any live questions till the end. That being said, if you need to come off mute for some reason, feel free to do so. But we do want to try to save that for the end. Okay, so to get into the actual content here, we're going to go through some market and policy updates first, and then in the middle of the presentation, we'll talk about some reminders and clarifications. These are things related to common mistakes we're seeing in reports or confusion that we've seen repeatedly, things that we could probably clarify a bit better. So we'll do that in the middle. And then at the end, there's a few minor program updates, stressor on the minor. These are not, significant new requests for content in the reports. It's just more related to our data collection process and how we're asking for some information to be presented. So yeah, so we'll jump into it. Start with market and policy updates. So this first slide is about kind of the state of FEPs right now across New York. So we have 401 districts in some stage of an FEP, which is great. That's beyond the halfway point for districts statewide, which we're really excited about. We want to keep getting that number up, but definitely want to thank all of you for continuing to reach out to districts and bringing those projects in. Hopefully we can keep that number increasing. We also have 13 BOCES engaged in their own, BOCES-specific FEP, which is really good, especially because many of them are studying opportunity charging for visiting districts. So we're really interested in also getting more BOCES doing that. It's going to really help kind of provide that that destination or opportunity charging for districts that are sending students to BOCES or need somewhere to charge for school field trips and things like that. It obviously does not solve all of those problems, but it helps to close some of the gap. We also have 9 FEPs for contractor depots across the state right now. A lot of those are focused in the New York City region, but there's a few sprinkled across the rest of the state as well. And while that number might seem small compared to the number of districts engaged, the depots that we are looking at have, in a lot of cases, a few hundred buses per depot. So it's actually a large share of vehicles, which is great. So, despite that, we're still always looking for more contractors, and we'll talk a little bit about, the funding available for bus contractors. There was a bit of confusion around that, and some of the caps for vehicle incentives and how that relates to contractors as well. So this next point, we're going to touch on this in a bunch of different ways throughout this presentation, but we are shifting our focus now towards collecting data from these completed FEP reports. We've got a fair number completed already, and we're expecting at least 200 by the end of this calendar year, if not more than that. So a lot of our focus and those minor program updates towards the end of the presentation are focused on that data collection process, making sure that we can do that in a comprehensive way and an efficient way, and collecting the same data across all reports. And then this last one is just a point of interest. There's 37 firms working on these FEPs. So again, thanks to all of you. We definitely really appreciate all of the hard work. This table on the right here is a regional breakdown of kind of how these FEPs are sprinkled across the state right now. So we have some really high uptake in Western New York, both the West and the Midwest regions, and some lower uptake in the Long Island area and kind of the mid and lower Hudson regions. So those are areas we'd love to see some more FEPs being completed, and we're definitely focusing some outreach in those areas as well. Okay, so on the state budget side of things, as you all probably know, the state budget was approved. I think it was towards the end of May, and there were 3 updates related to electric school buses that came out of that. So the first one is an additional $100 million that was allocated for school bus electrification. The details of how that or what program that's going into yet are still being worked out. We're in talks with the governor's office with Chamber to figure out what the intent was there, but it's likely that will go into our existing NISBIP program, but we'll certainly share our details as that gets solidified. The second update was related to an additional 2-year extension, and I say additional because the initial law already had an opportunity for a 2-year extension on the 2027 deadline, and this now brings that to a total possible extension of 4 years. So I want to highlight that that is just on the 2027 date. It is not on the 2035 date. So if a school district gets a 2-year extension or even, the total of 4 years, it does not push that 2035 date back to 2037 or 2039. That 2035 date is still hard line in the sand. So while that 2-year extension may seem very very good to a lot of districts, very appealing to many districts, it does shorten that time frame in which they still have to get to that 100% zero emission bus fleet by 2035. We've gotten a lot of questions around the details of how that's going to be decided, what the requirements are around that. That is also still up in the air, and that ultimately comes down to State Education Department, SED. So they are required by law to post the details for this extension process by the end of this calendar year. We're going to be working closely with them to make sure that those requirements are aligned with the FEP process and the NISBIP requirements and things like that. So we are definitely going to be talking with them a lot about that, but ultimately that will come from them. So keep your eyes peeled for that, and we'll certainly share our details as soon as that is posted. The third update was related to an independent third-party range estimate, and this requirement is primarily for the OEMs, so it's less specific to the FEP side of things, but we've still been getting a lot of questions about it, rightfully so. So this requirement comes into effect on January 1st, 2026. That's obviously pretty soon. So the details of this are still being worked out as well. We'll share out information as we kind of figure out what that looks like. But primarily, we're trying to figure out right now what NYSERDA's role is in this. Obviously, we want to have a role in this. So as we get more details, we'll keep you all in the loop. And then some quick updates on the federal funding side of things. For the EPA Clean School Bus grants and rebate awards, we've heard across the board that those have been unfrozen. So if those were already awarded, districts should be able to draw that money down from the EPA website at this point. I think that's been the case since early spring, which has been good. So definitely want to reiterate that if a district was awarded funding, they should definitely try to draw that down sooner rather than later, but it's possible right now. That being said, it's still unclear when the most recent, that I think there was a grant solicitation that closed January 6th, and awardees for that have not been announced yet, and it's unclear when that will happen. So just wanted to highlight that fact. And then the IRA tax credits, we just actually updated the slide from yesterday's presentation, so you guys are getting the most up-to-date stuff here. But these were previously going to expire in 2032, and now that has been significantly shortened. So 45W expires September 30th, 2025, and 30C expires June 30th, 2026. So, I don't know how many districts were taking advantage of these tax credits, but if you have districts that are interested in taking advantage of them, I would recommend doing that definitely sooner rather than later, especially with the 45W one. All right, so that closes updates on the market and policy side of things. So I'm going to switch over to reminders and clarifications. So this first one is one of the more important ones, and this is also related again to the fact that we're shifted into a data collection kind of mindset with these. As we've been, reading through these, I know a lot of you, we've sent comments back, and we read through them in detail, every single word. We've noticed kind of an uptick in some discrepancies in the reports on the spelling and grammar side, which not as big of a deal, but more importantly in the numerical values, especially between the texts and the tables. This is definitely a big issue we want to highlight. If it's getting to us and we're catching this, we really want that to be caught before it comes to NYSERDA. So just a request to kind of put a renewed focus on the quality control side of things before sending even draft reports to us. It's definitely time consuming to try to trace those errors and figure out what went wrong, but we want to make sure we pull out the correct information from those data tables and from the text and things like that. So please just put a renewed effort into the quality control side of things. That will help speed things up on our side as well, so that we can get those reports back to you faster and get them back to the districts faster, and ultimately approve those final invoices for projects faster. So speaking of invoices, the other reminder is that NYSERDA does have a requirement that we request you only bill once per month per project. This is also kind of a efficiency and time consideration. While they do go through the finance team, they ultimately do come to Jeff, Sarah, and myself. We approve every single invoice for every project. So when there's multiple invoices coming in per month per project, that significantly increases the workload and just decreases the time we have to spend on reviewing FEPs and getting projects churned out. So we've been seeing an increase in multiple invoices per month per project. We've been approving them for the time being, but starting next week, we are going to start denying those invoices. I know this probably isn't directly related to your day-to-day, most people on this call, but if you could put a reminder into your accounting and finance teams to make sure they're only invoicing us once per month. Otherwise, we will start sending those back and denying those invoices. So those were the kind of the less fun updates or reminders. I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to do some more.
Great, thanks, Mike. So our next reminder is nothing new. just a reminder about the incentive caps for our NSBIT program. So one of the discrepancies we've noticed in some of the reports that we've been reviewing is that when costs are being estimated, the voucher caps are not being taken into account. So it's just assumed that the bus vouchers and the charging vouchers can be used for every bus, every charger in the fleet. But want to make sure that the cost estimates are accurate of what's actually available to the districts. So just making sure you're taking into consideration the caps for the number of buses that the district's able to apply for. So that's different between the non-priority and priority districts. And then the amount of money available for chargers. So for non-priority districts, it's 25,000 per charger. For priority, it's 35,000, and then we have that FEP bonus with a $2 million cap for each school district. So just making sure you're taking those caps into consideration when calculating those different incentive amounts for the districts. Another thing we wanted to highlight was third-party operators. So as I'm sure all of you know, a lot of the school districts in the state contract out either a portion of their fleet or the full amount of their fleet with a bus contracting company. Um, it's important to note that the district capped is going to apply for their full fleet. So if a school district owns 50% of their fleet and then contracts out the other 50%, the cap for that district goes across their full school bus fleet. So the school district can decide if they want to use all of their vouchers for that district owned portion of their fleet, if they want to apply some to their contracted portion of the fleet, but that cap remains for the district's entire fleet. Kind of on the other side of that, third-party operators have sub-district caps, so they fall within each of the school districts that they're serving. There's not a specific cap for each third-party operator. So if a school bus contracting company serves 5 districts, they're not being held to the 6 vehicle cap across those 5 districts. They would have that cap for each district they're serving. So each district has their own individual cap. If there's ever any questions about these caps amounts or um, how they apply to different contracted fleets for different school districts, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to kind of talk that through on an individual basis. Um, Next slide, please. So thank you. Our next reminder is just vehicle types for electrification. So we've been noticing in a lot of reports lately that obviously we're looking at electrifying the school buses for the school districts. And typically when we think of school buses, we're thinking of the yellow school bus that you see in this picture. But by NICEAD's definition, a school bus is every vehicle owned, leased, or contracted by the school district that serves for the transportation of students. So that's going to include any vans serving the school district, any SUVs, or really any other vehicle that the school district is using for student transportation. So because of this, we'd really like to include those vans, those SUVs, those additional vehicles in our fleet studies. What this will look like is including it in really every aspect. So including those vans and SUVs in the route analysis, estimating the minimum battery size requirement and size of the charger that would be needed to meet those routes needs for that van or SUV, and then some cost estimates for potential OEMs that the school district could purchase these vehicles from. The one thing we want to note kind of for these vans and SUVs is that our NSBIT program is specific to those yellow school buses. So while we do want to have those vans and SUVs in our route analysis, in the cost estimates, in every section of our FEP, on the NSBIT side, we're not able to provide funding for those vans and SUVs, but we are hoping that the technology is a little bit further advanced for vehicles like that than it is for our electric school buses. So the cost should be a good bit lower for vans and SUVs and hopefully a little bit more comparable to their diesel or gas counterparts. So just making sure you're including those in your plans going forward so that the school district has a good picture of what will be required. Lastly, on this point, we also want to note that since you're including it in the full report, these vans and SUVs should be taken into consideration when you're calculating the peak demand for the property and also when you're planning out a charge management system for the school district, because we want them to be fully equipped to run all of their vehicles. Next slide, please. Thank you. Our next one is on FEP cost share amounts. So we just want to note that cost share amounts for FEPs have not changed. So priority districts or districts whose depot fall within a disadvantaged community are funded 100% by NYSERDA. So we will pay for the full fleet study. For non-priority districts, we can fund 75% of the fleet study. So still a significant portion. On a lot of the applications we've been receiving recently, we've noticed incorrect cost share amounts. So just wanted to flag these cost share amounts have not changed. We think some of the confusion might have come from our buildings team changing their cost share amounts. So if you work closely with the buildings team at NYSERDA, their cost share amounts have dropped to 75 and 50%. But for the FEPs, they have remained the same, 100% for priority districts and then 75 for non-priority districts. Also want to note that there are some old versions of the priority district list floating around. We updated it sometime in February or March of this year, and the newest version of the priority district list is on the FEP website. I've also linked it on the slide here, which we'll be sending out after this presentation, so you should have access to it. The DIC map is also available on the NYSERDA website, so those are all available to you, but if you ever have any questions about what level of funding a district should receive, please feel free to reach out to us. Next slide. Awesome. Then our next reminder is just about cost estimates. So we've noticed that there's been some differences consultant to consultant on what is considered a utility side cost and what is considered a customer side cost. So we just want to remind everyone that we're going by the JU's definition of what they're considering utility side versus customer side for their Make Ready program. So this image is also available on our NSBIP webpage, but it also is in these slides, so you'll have reference to them later. But just making sure that when you're breaking down those cost estimates, you're following the JU's definition of a utility side cost versus a customer side cost. We do expect that all FEPs estimate customer side costs, so that should be included in your cost estimates at the end of your fleet electrification plan that you turn into us. The utility side costs, we understand that not everyone is comfortable estimating those because there's a lot of different variables, a lot of different inputs, things to take into consideration. And a lot of times, until we have some better design plans, we might not have a great estimate of what these utility costs might be. So if the utility side costs are left out of the FEP, that's completely fine. But we do expect to see those customer side costs every time. Okay, next slide. Great. And with that, I will pass it over to Jeff for some more reminders.
Thanks, Sarah. Hey, everyone. This slide is just a reminder for the FEP bonus timing and at-risk work. FEP bonuses can only be applied once the draft report is submitted and received in NYSERDA's hands, meaning Mike, myself, Jeff, Sarah, or Jilly has to have the FEP, the draft report in hand before they can apply for the FEP bonus. It's intended to incentivize districts to plan their charging needs before making any decisions. And then the last two bullet points on this slide kind of coincide with each other. Work completed before an application is submitted will not be reimbursed, and any work done before PO is issued is at-risk work. So meaning if you're going to try and bill for any work before we've issued a PO, NYSERDA is not responsible for that work until the PO is in your hands. Next slide. This slide is a reminder for funding for bus contractors. Bus contractors get all the same funding as school districts. Bus contractors can get the same cost share as the school districts they are serving. If a depot serves multiple school districts, it qualifies for the highest amount of funding from any of those school districts. The only time a contractor would get 50% funding would be if they are only studying a portion of their fleet depot. NYSERDA will not fund the subsequent studies for depots that were only partially addressed. Next slide. Reminder that BOCES and opportunity charging, that BOCES are eligible for 100% of their study to be funded. The BOCES that are studied, opportunity charging can get their FEP 100% covered as long as they fall inside of that disadvantaged community area. Funding for BOCES that don't study opportunity charging and only look at their BOCES own fleet is determined whether or not their depot is located within that area. BOCES must complete their FEP to qualify for opportunity charges through NYSBIP, and districts can study opportunity charging, but it doesn't impact their cost share. And then in the next section, we're just going to move into some minor program updates. And this is an update for FEP closeout. NYSERDA is trying to create a smoother handoff between planning and implementation of these FEPs. So basically, when these FEPs are completed, we really want to make sure we emphasize that There's, a meeting between yourselves and the district, explaining in full detail what the findings of the FEP were and what the next steps could be for the district to really get their pilot moving, or their next, their first phase in the construction process for electrifying their fleet. When you close out a project with NYSERDA as well, please indicate to us that the closeout meeting was held and the district was provided the summary of any key issues that the district plans for the next step. And with that, I will hand it back over to Sarah.
Great, thanks, Jeff. So our next update is nothing super major, but we are asking for an FEP data worksheet to be filled out and turned in with your draft reports. Now, this data worksheet is going to include just all of the major data points in a nutshell that you're including in the report already. So we're not asking for any new data. Really what we're asking for is a standardized sheet so that we're able to easily pull those data points into our trackers, collect some metrics, and easily kind of track how all of these districts are doing. So in this data sheet, like I said, it will be all of the major data points from the report. So it's going to be information on the current fleet at the school district, so whatever diesel or gas buses they're running, information on the recommended fleet, so what buses you're recommending for purchase, what size chargers, some utility information, so the capacity on site, how many buses could be supported on that capacity, the estimated costs for any infrastructure upgrades, cost for the buses, cost for the chargers, really any of those main data points that you might have been including in the executive summary or you might have been highlighting in tables throughout the report. We just want to pull them all into one clean worksheet so that we can easily input them in our trackers. As Mike mentioned before, we are reading all of these reports in detail and not only looking for grammar and consistency, but also pulling all of these data points already. And that's a lot of what's slowing down our review process because we want to make sure we're collecting accurate data. So this worksheet will be a great way for us to make sure we're getting those accurate data points and that we're able to quickly put them into our trackers. These data points are going to be extremely important moving forward for us. We talked a little bit about those waiver requirements from NYSED. They haven't released the waiver requirements yet, but we do expect that the data points that we're collecting from these FEPs will be extremely important in kind of informing NYSED while they're making these decisions. So making sure we have all this information available will be great. We will send out this data worksheet to everyone after this call, but it will also be posted on our FEP website shortly. We have it uploading as we speak. And we'll also be posting a data definitions page. So basically a copy of this worksheet, but in each data point, we'll have an explanation of exactly what we're looking for, just to make sure we have consistency from consultant to consultant. When you're starting to use this data sheet, if you're noticing that there's some discrepancies, there's some questions that don't quite make sense, or if you're noticing major data points missing that maybe we didn't think of, please feel free to reach out to us. We definitely want this to be a document that grows with our program. So as we make improvements, we'll make improvements to it. Another thing to note, if you're doing any route analysis only studies, so studies that are only looking at the routes, not considering the site, we still expect to have a lot of this information in there. So current fleet information, future fleet information, cost estimates for buses and chargers, but obviously some of the data points would be left out, mostly in the utility information or site information, things like that. So if you ever feel like you're inputting information on a report and some of it just doesn't apply to that specific report, just reach out to us again and we're happy to talk through it. But we do expect that most of these data points will be filled out every time unless it's a route analysis only study. Okay, next slide, please. Our other major update is that we're setting a threshold for what we consider to be feasible routes to electrify by 2035. So when you're going through your route analysis section of the FEP, you should be providing a minimum battery size requirement for each route that the school district is running. We're realizing that there is kind of some uncertainty around what will be possible to electrify by 2035. We may have a route that requires a certain size battery that's not available on the market yet, but we expect it to become available on the market by the 2035 deadline. So we'd be able to electrify it towards the end of this cycle. And we just kind of wanted to have a hard cutoff to make sure there's consistency between consultants when they're recommending what buses can be electrified, which ones should be electrified later, things like that. So the threshold that we're proposing is type A buses, 400 kilowatt hours for the battery, and type C and D buses, 600 kilowatt hours for the battery. The reason we picked these numbers is that these are the current battery sizes for a lot of electric transit vehicles. And after watching them grow for the past 10 or so years, it kind of gave us an idea of the battery sizes we can expect to see from the school buses in the next 10 or so years, because they're a little behind on that growth curve. Um, so when identifying the battery requirements for each route, if the battery size requirement is equal to or less than this threshold, we would assume that that route can be electrified by 2035. If it's close to that threshold, maybe that's one that you recommend towards the end of the process, but we would assume that it can be electrified. If a battery size requirement is greater than this threshold for any of the routes in the report, we would assume that the route will not be able to be electrified by 2035. Now, this is one of the data points that we're asking you to collect in that new data worksheet. So easy place to put it right in. Just moving forward, we want to make sure we're keeping these in mind. So we're consistent across the board and we can identify any school districts that might have routes that can't be easily electrified in the next 10 years. Next slide. I think with that, I pass it back to Mike.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So that's it. As promised, that was about 25 to 30 minutes. Here's a summary slide of everything we went through. I'm not going to read through all this stuff, but on the left is the market and policy updates. In the middle, each bullet point pretty much corresponds to one of those slides Jeff or Sarah went through on reminders and clarifications. And then on the right are those minor program updates that we just closed out with. So I'm going to leave this up and open it up for questions. I haven't seen anything in the chat come in, so if you've got a question now, feel free to just come off mute, or if you would rather just type it in the chat, that works as well, and I can read it out and answer it. Give a little bit to see if anyone types anything. And while we do that, just I guess a clarification. So with the data worksheet, we are expecting that to be submitted to us with draft reports and final reports. So that gives us a chance to pull the data in on the first pass, and then if there's any updates, we would want those highlighted, in track changes when it's resubmitted after comments for the final report. Let's see if there's anything else to clarify here. On the BOCES opportunity charging side of things, so BOCES, regardless of if they're in a DAC or not, if they look at opportunity charging, they can get 100% funding for their FEP. Doesn't matter the location of the depot. If they don't look at opportunity charging, then they get whatever the funding amount is based on their DAC status or priority district status. I will clarify that 100% funding does not carry over into the actual bus and charger vouchers. That's just on the FEP side of things. Again, we're trying to encourage studying opportunity charging, but when you get to the bus and charging voucher applications, that will just work based on priority district status or where it is based on our DAC map. All right, I see a question. 2 questions, nice. All right, I'll start with yours, Jim. Do you have guidance for future ESB costs to use in the studies? So right now we're just asking that, current ESB prices are used. The OGS contract, the state OGS contract for buses is a great resource. That is the pre-negotiated bus prices. Now that just applies to school districts. Bus contractors don't have to use the OGS contract when buying buses, so they may have different prices for buses. But in terms of forecasting future ESB costs, I don't have a recommendation for that, and I think I would just recommend using current costs and putting, some clear text in your report that says these costs are subject to change. But it's just too variable right now to, I think, even apply a realistic inflation or growth percentage to those costs. So I would just use what it is today. Arthur, for NISWIP incentives for chargers, 35,000 per charger and partners, how should we consider projects that are built in phases? So the phases should not matter in terms of the caps. The cap is on a per district basis. So if you put in 10 chargers now, but buses will come in 5 buses this year, 5 buses next year. It depends when the chargers are being installed. So I think that's less of a incentive question and more of just a project phasing question. And apologies if I'm misunderstanding the question here. Feel free to come into $35,000 per charger per bus. Okay, I see what you're saying. So yeah, so that is just the per charger per bus is indicating that there needs to be a bus purchase corresponding with the charger purchase in order for that charger to qualify. So the amount awarded is still per charger, but that language in the implementation manual is saying in order for that charger to qualify for any funding whatsoever, it needs to have a corresponding bus associated with it. So if you're installing 5 chargers one year and 5 the next, but you're getting if you're installing all 10 chargers at the same time, but the buses are phased apart, you can wait to reimburse those chargers. I think the time is up to 15 months, I believe. So you can install them all at the same time, but there's definitely some consideration that would have to be some timing consideration taken into account there in terms of when you install those chargers and timing out the bus purchase. Now, that being said, we do grant extensions on charger applications. If there's a realistic reason to extend it, this is a good one. If you know there's buses being purchased, but they just haven't arrived yet, that's fine. Or, if you have the purchase order for the bus already, but it's just not on the ground, that purchase order is fine. You can still use that to get that charger reimbursement. So hopefully that answered the question. That was a bit of a roundabout answer as I kind of figured out what was being asked, but all right, sounds like it did. Thanks, Arthur. Gabriel, as of when do we expect needing to incorporate the FEP data worksheet? ASAP. So again, this is something we're not asking for new data to be included in that. It's just a new requirement when you're submitting the final report. So if you have not submitted a final report for a project yet, and even if you plan on submitting it, next week, we'd expect that data worksheet to be submitted with it. That should be data that you already have as part of the project. So it's just a matter of putting it into the worksheet. If you've already submitted a final report in the last few months, and we still haven't gotten around to the review of it, we'll send the data worksheet back with any comments, and we'll fill it out for you. And we would just ask that you then review it and make sure that what we put in that worksheet aligns with what you have on your side. And if there's any changes, send it back to us with the updated report and track changes. So if you've already submitted something to it, we'll fill it out for you. But definitely it will be the consultant's responsibility to fill it out moving forward. Good questions. Anything else? Everyone's clear on cost share amounts for FEPs, funding for bus contractors. That's good information to pass along to school districts you're working with or have contact with. Seeing a thank you from Jim. All right, it's akin to getting played off at the Oscars. So it sounds like questions are wrapping up. So thanks everyone. Appreciate your time today. I think you know where to reach us, but here's our emails just in case you do need them. We'll probably do this again in another 6 months when we have more updates on waiver requirements, tier extensions, third-party range estimates, things like that. So talk to you then. Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.